It's no secret that I'm a fan of marriage and the family. It's not just that I think that people should get married, but that they should be exceedingly fruitful and multiply, have as many kids as they reasonably can, in other words. Marriage is an essential building block to society, and this is a drum that I will never stop beating on. Without the institution of marriage being healthy and thriving in the culture, as history and anthropology both show, the cultures tend to crumble and die. Without the family, there is no not only is there no healthy population growth, but people on an individual level become emotionally and spiritually stagnant. They tend to shrivel up, and the culture as a whole becomes cynical and nihilistic as a result. We're seeing this happen en masse in our own culture here in the United States of America. The God fearing nuclear family has become an oddity here in the West. As God has been edged out of the public consciousness, people have become radically self interested, materialistic, individualistic, and narcissistic. As an unavoidable result, marriage and family are at all-time lows. The numbers are undeniable. There were 6.9 million single-person households in 1960 in the United States of America. Now that number has grown up to 38 million as of 2022. Now that's to say nothing of the millions of men and women who insist on living together outside of wedlock because they don't have the guts or the maturity to commit to one another. Now, and the replacement rate in the United States of America has been dropping catastrophically for decades. People aren't getting married and they are not having children. In 1950, there were a little under 25 births per 1,000 people in the United States of America. Now, today, again, as of 2022, that number is, by optimistic estimates, close to half of what it was in 1950. 12 births per 1,000 people in the U.S. Now, the really sad part is that 40.5%, that's almost half of those births were to single unmarried women. So almost half of the children born this past year were born into pre-broken homes and will grow up without a healthy family life. That is the really sad part to me. So no civilization can sustain itself like this for long. Our culture is dying a slow spiritual and physical death. All of this because young people just don't want to grow up. They don't want to be bothered with life, with real life. Young adults have been so influenced by a society that has done its best to ostracize God, by hyper-individualistic influences, by media and entertainment, that they genuinely believe that their lives ought to revolve around recreation, around entertainment, around their own amusement. Young adults don't want to face the realities of adulting, as they call it. They just want to extend their adolescence indefinitely for as long as they can possibly get away with it. And that is what most grown adults these days are doing. Young men just don't want to get married and have responsibilities. No, they just want to be carefree. They want to have as much commitment-free sex as they can with as many women as they can for as long as they can. Men, you can pretend all you want that sex doesn't have consequences, but that is not, nor has it ever been, the case. Okay, there is no such thing as free love. I could talk about that for hours, and I've written about that for many hours, but that's not the point today. If you want to hear more about that, I have videos on that, or I have a whole book about that. I have known plenty of men my age and much older who, as Jordan Peterson so accurately put it once, just wanted to be the oldest guy at the frat party. I believe that's what he said. But I was actually in the fraternity in college, okay, and I saw that metaphor materialized firsthand. A lot of alumni would visit our frat house when we had parties. These were men in their 30s and sometimes 40s who were trying to party with 18 to 22-year-olds. Okay, and they should have been married with families by now, but they didn't want to move on with their lives. They were just stuck in college. They were stuck trying to recapture their days as dumb kids doing dumb things. And they would rather be the creepy old guy drunkenly hitting on college girls than doing something meaningful with their lives. Now, I wish that were rare, but sadly, that is the commonplace state of our society. It doesn't always look exactly like that, of course, like being 35 and still going to college parties, but we're living in an overall maturity-stunted culture. Fewer and fewer people are getting married and having families, and of the few who are getting married, they are waiting for as long as they possibly can before settling down, which is really done for a number of reasons, and yes, a sign of immaturity. But marriage and family imply the occurrence of that dreaded R word, responsibility, and most people in my generation go out of their way to avoid that, and that makes one immature by definition. If you avoid responsibility, you are immature. Mature people are those who not only accept responsibility when it is thrust upon them, but who actively seek it out in one way or another. Now, a boy will seek to play games all throughout his 20s and his 30s. A man seeks to do something constructive with that time, to serve God and his family with that time. Of course, that implies actually starting a family, assuming that he even has the option. Now, I'm not going after anybody who has genuinely tried but has not yet had success in that area. That's not your fault. That just is what it is. Now, a scumbag teenager wants to remain a bachelor and treat women as toys for his own hedonistic pleasure. A man, and a good one at that, finds one woman. He marries her properly. He commits himself to her alone. He loves her. He cherishes her. He honors her. And ideally, that love brings forth children. That is more responsibility. That is more love to go around. And yes, that is more purpose in the man's life. But that scares most young people today. They don't want responsibility. They want pleasure. They want recreation. They want to buy expensive toys, sometimes being literal toys. They want an easygoing and carefree lifestyle. And even if that means that their life amounts to nothing of substance, which is the axiomatic result of living a life in pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of responsibility. A life lived in service to self. Extended adolescence is the hallmark of my generation. No one wants to be a man anymore. All the men and women want to live in perpetual nostalgia and recapture their youth, as with the 35-year-olds who are partying it up with 18 to 22-year-olds. We, and by we I mean my generation generally, try unsuccessfully to extend our adolescence, and by doing so, deprive ourselves of the one worthwhile method of experiencing childhood during adulthood, by having a family and spending time with our children. Now, society can't thrive this way. It just can't. We are not meant to remain children forever, and we shouldn't try to. We do, however, have a natural inclination, a natural urge to experience childlike things again in adulthood, but that inclination is supposed to be carried out by spending time with our children. All right, that's why the inner kid, the childlike nature, is still alive in us as adults to a certain degree. To help us relate to those little cherubs that we love so much, or in someone like C.S. Lewis's case, to help write a children's book, or like the Chronicles of Narnia. Unfortunately, our generation has misused and bastardized that inborn parental instinct and trait into something somewhat dysfunctional. Adults have so shunned maturity in adulthood that grown men and women, single with no children, are responsible for the clear majority of children's toy purchases in the U.S., depending on which news source you ask, and certainly they're responsible for at least a quarter of the Christmas purchases, the Christmas toy purchases this past Christmas season. And they're not buying toys for their children because they don't have any. They're not buying them for their nieces and nephews. They're, by their own admission, buying them for themselves. And to be clear, we're not talking about collectors or people buying expensive action figures for their collection or some such. We're talking about grown adults, my age and older, who are playing with Fisher-Price toys meant for 3 and 4-year-olds, actually playing with them. So if you couldn't find that one Transformer or Bluey doll for your children this year that they wanted for Christmas, you can rest easy knowing that some 30-year-old man is playing with them in his rented apartment. Now, these people are being affectionately referred to as kidults by the news media. The Huffington Post, for example, who thinks that they're a legit news outlet, which is just delightfully funny, claims that single childless adults playing with dolls and Tonka trucks is actually a good thing and that more people should get into the habit. And frankly, I think that the idea of more childless adults spending all their free time playing with little kid toys is both creepy and spells doom for Western culture. Instead of becoming adults, getting married, and having children, these kidults have instead foregone the joys of family life and now seek to depressingly play with little children's toys by themselves in their rented apartments in a sad attempt to relive their childhood and to experience nostalgia. Now, if anyone is worthy of pity, it is that sad and lonely individual. Look, adults need recreation for a balanced life. They do. They need to goof off and have some fun once in a while. That is a good thing. But child's play and recreational activities are very separate things. And I think Matt Walsh made a very similar point to mine sometime last month, and he got some heat for it. I think he goes a little bit further than I do on this front. But, I mean, look, if you want to play the occasional video game, I have no problem with that. There's nothing wrong with that. I personally, for one, enjoy experiencing a story through that medium. I mean, my personal favorite is Mass Effect, and if you've ever played God of War, the new ones, then there's a great father-son story in those games. So I'm all for that. And if you want to go airsofting or paintballing with your buddies one weekend, great. That sounds like fun. But there has to be a line that is drawn somewhere. Okay, having fun, blowing off steam, a little recreation, playing a game, that's all well and good. But we have to draw the line somewhere. Look, I'm a bit of a nerd. I'm not judging anybody who has a nerdy hobby, believe me. I'm a bit of a nerd. You can see the Star Wars office decoration right behind me. But there's a difference between having that in my office and being on the floor crisscross applesauce, playing with that and others, going pew, 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 pew. Okay, if I was doing something like that, you might think that things had gone too far. If I was in my office on the floor doing that, just pew, 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 pew. Okay, so there has to be a line drawn somewhere for adults where we spend our time doing recreational activities that are age appropriate. Let's be honest. If you're a parent and you see a 35-year-old man on the jungle gym with your kids, he doesn't have any kids. He's just there trying to play with you'd be a little concerned, wouldn't you? Look, I've been shopping around recently for a Fisher-Price Castle and Knight set that I once had as a small child and enjoyed playing with back then. And I'm getting ready to retrieve my old dinosaur toys from my mother's storage unit. But none of that is for me. It's because my first child is on the way, and I'm having a son soon, and I'm eagerly looking forward to doing things with him that I personally enjoyed as a small child, and I can't wait to hear my son invent a little story in his head involving the castle and the knights, and ask me to help him play out the scenario going on in his head. Okay, I can't wait to be a part of his childhood, but it is his childhood. It's not mine. My childhood ended ages ago, and I just get the privilege of seeing it now from a parent's perspective, which is going to be just as fun in my opinion, and probably a whole lot more fulfilling. I get to experience childhood again as an adult, as a parent. That's a natural and healthy thing, right? That's the normal circle of life. But our culture has become so narcissistic, so inwardly focused, that most adults now don't want kids. They want to skip having kids and twist that desire to act like a parent into something selfish and kind of pathetic and honestly a bit depressing. And most of them are going to end up severely depressed because they've made their entire life about themselves. And the nostalgia that people are chasing, all right, in doing this stuff it's not a bad thing. Nostalgia isn't an inherently bad thing. It's just being pursued in a bad way. Nostalgia is meant to be lived out by means of sharing childhood experience with our own children. I will relive my childhood, so to speak, by making memories with my son, by spending time with him and doing childlike things with him. And I imagine that it will be a lot more enjoyable and meaningful than if I were to spend my days playing with toys by myself as a 28-year-old man in a lonely, solitary room because I didn't want the responsibility of having a family. A culture that lacks marriage and family is a culture that lacks maturity. And as we can plainly see by the middle-aged single men playing with speaking spells, a culture that lacks maturity is a culture that is on the verge of collapse and death. We need real men and women again. Okay, we need it desperately. We need men with the courage to get married. None of this play the field bachelor nonsense. Okay, we have never needed more playboys in the world. Weak-willed, pathetic men. Okay, we have never needed more of those. We are hurting for husbands and fathers, men of character. We need women with the strength of will to be wives and mothers, to bring forth life into the world as only a woman can do, and to raise the next generation of men and women to have noble character. The world will not hurt if fewer women commit their entire lives to the corporate ladder or to the gathering of material wealth. But the world is already hurting from a shortage of good mothers. We need the family, and we need God at the center of the family. Who do you think invented that most imperative institution in the first place? God knows exactly how the family is supposed to work. So do it his way. It's time to grow up a little bit, America. Put away the childish things. Get married as soon as you can. Become an adult, have babies. And then you can bring the childish things back out and enjoy them with your own children. If marriage and children truly aren't for you, which is necessarily the minority situation, but if it's not, then you would best be pursuing God's purpose for your life in whatever way possible. Because God does not call people to singleness just so that they can spend their whole lives as immature children and materialistic consumers. So if you are so utterly convinced that you are called to singleness, then you better have a purpose in mind to pursue. You're an adult, so be one worth admiring.